Hello, BookTube. Welcome back to my 2024 library tour. Um, this is the 11th part of science fiction and fantasy, Norma Desmond on the Moon. So let's get going. So the first three books are the first three books in a tetralogy by John Sprunk. They're the Book of the Black Earth. Part 1 is Blood and Iron. Book 2 is Storm and Steel. And book 3 is Blade and Bone. And there's a fifth book that came out, I think, about 5 years ago, or fourth book that came out about 5 years ago. The next two books are anthologies, in part edited by Jonathan Strahan. First up is the Locus Awards, 30 Years of the Best in Science Fiction and Fantasy, edited by Jonathan Strahan and Charles N. Brown. So this anthology collects the winners of the Locus Awards. Next is Swords and Dark Magic, The New Sword and Sorcery, edited by Jonathan Strahan and Lou Anders. So this book looks at sword and sorcery published in the 2000s. And I remember this anthology quite fondly. There are a few really good stories in here. The next two books are by Neil Stephenson. First up is Cryptonomicon, which I haven't gotten around to. And this is The Diamond Age, which is one of the early works of steampunk. Let's come over here and knock that out so I don't have to look at it while I'm filming. The next two books are by K.M. Sapara. First up is Docile, which is a near-future dystopic science fiction novel about a young man who gets into debt slavery, and rather than taking a drug called Docile that would make him basically forget everything that happened during his period of in servitude, he elects to not take it. And the young man who buys him basically decides that this will give him an opportunity to train him how he wants and to get some sexual kinks in as well. Next is First Become Ashes, also by K.M. Sapara. So this book is a more contemporary, maybe fantasy, maybe not, about a cult that believes that through extreme acts of torture and abuse, they can manifest magical powers. And the main character is a victim of this cult, and he goes on an adventure to try to, I guess, have a real life adventure. I have never gotten around to it. The next two books are by Naman Gilbert Tillahan. The first two books in the Wrath and Athenaeum series, whose third book, The Fruit, will eventually be published. Maybe about the same time that Winds of Winter is. The first book in the series is The Root. It's about a young man who was a child television star whose boyfriend was sent to prison for it's probably statutory rape. and he develops superpowers, and he gets involved in a war to protect Earth from invasions from other dimensions. And there's a subplot, or it's like a secondary plot set in one of these other dimensions. The second book is called The Tree. The next two books are from J.R.R. Tolkien. First up is The Hobbit, which I have never read. And of course, The Lord of the Rings, which I've read once and I've struggled to reread ever since. The next three books are, the next book is by Jeff Vandermeer, and then the next few are edited by him and his wife. So this is Ambergris, a big bind-up edition that includes the Ambergris novels Cities of Saints and Madmen, Shriek, and afterward Finch. And there's another anthology in a similar, or omnibus in a similar look for the Southern Reach trilogy. Have not gotten around to these yet. So, onto the Vandermeer anthologies. First up is The New Weird, which is the first anthology by the Vandermeers that I read. So this looks at the science fiction fantasy subgenre known as the New Weird, which is best typified by the work of China Mieville. So this is a bit of a weird anthology. There are some short stories in here, but then there's other material that I'm not entirely sure whether or not its inclusion really quite works. I also have Steampunk, which is quite good. There are a few really good stories in here. I also have the Big Book of Science Fiction, which is a massive compendium of science fiction stories from the early 20th century to the near present, or at least when this book was published. There are some really good stories in there and some not so good stories, which is the nature of anthology. I really have got to do a better job testing these. This is the Big Book of Classic Fantasy. So this anthology is part of a duology of anthologies. So this one includes fantasy stories from, do a quick look at the table of contents. So from Bettina von Arnim and Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm through to J.R. Tolkien and Marcel Aimé and Clark Ashton Smith. So it's really up through like the 30s or 40s. And then there's the second book, which is more contemporary or modern and contemporary science fiction. So moving away from the Vandermeers, but sticking with an anthology, this is the very best of science fiction and fantasy. It's the 60th anniversary anthology edited by Gordon Van Gelder. So this includes the best science fiction and fantasy published in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine, or the magazine of science, fantasy, and science fiction, over 60 years. The next book is Radiance by Catherine M. Valenti. This novel had been for a few years one of my favorites. It's a weird alternate universe space opera set in a solar system that is significantly closer together, and where most of the planets are habitable. Um, and it's about two filmmakers, a father and daughter. The daughter was a documentary filmmaker who died on location during one of her films, and her father has tried to make a film sort of to kind of work through his grief. And a lot of this novel is variations on this story to try to come to terms with it, and it's quite complex. So I first read it in 2017 and loved it. I reread it in 2019 and really enjoyed it again. And then my most recent reread attempt a year or two ago did not quite turn out how I had hoped. Of course, I've also been struggling with or having fallen out with science fiction and fantasy over the last few years. Probably could also explain it. So the next book is Legacy of Ash by Matthew Ward. It is the first book in the Legacy trilogy, which I think wrapped up a few years ago. I dipped into this for a tri-chapter challenge and did not quite get on with it. It's basically the main character is a prince from a conquered state who's sought out for an alliance by a rival kingdom to the state that conquered his homeland. All the while, the man who I think led the conquest of his homeland is trying to seek him out or trying to be a father figure or something like that in order to keep him on side. So the next 4 books are by Brent Weeks. I have an omnibus edition of the Night Angel trilogy, which I'm not entirely sure why I have, except for maybe as a bill redemption attempt, because I did have a go at the first book in the trilogy and really did not like it. So, but that is one of my habits, annoyingly enough. So I also have the first 2 books in the Lightbringer series, Black Prism, which I did a tri-chapter tag of a few weeks ago and didn't get on with. And I also have The Blinding Knife, which is book 2. And The Broken Eye, which is book 3. The next 3 books are by Martha Wells. City of Bones, which I haven't gotten to. Well, pretty much all of these except for the anthologies I have not really gotten to. The Element of Fire. The Death of the Necromancer. And the last 2 books, well, the penultimate book on this shelf is Ship of Smoke and Steel by Django Wexler. The only book by his I have, and I think this is more or less young adult. And the final book on the shelf is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. And this rather annoying cover, because I don't give a hoot about whether or not it's made into a major motion picture or inspired it. So I'm not entirely sure whether I should keep it in science fiction and fantasy or move it to classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. But anyway, so that was the 11th shelf. Tomorrow I will get to the 12th shelf, the final shelf of this science fiction and fantasy part of my collection. So till then, BookTube, thank you. Have a great afternoon and stay safe.